does play a role, it's not primarily adjudicated at that level. Now, interestingly, they're going after Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania for comparing the events of January 6th to the Reichstag fire in Germany. Now, the Reichstag fire was 1933. Let's look at that. What happened in the Reichstag fire was the fire was set. Initially, they didn't know who set it. It was a big investigation. And now I think historians are generally agreed it was set by one guy who was a foreign-born communist. So somebody who, of course, was a subversive himself and decided, I'll burn down the whole parliament. And although the Nazis were socialists, by the way, they hated the communists. Why? Not because of the socialism. They had that in common. The reason they hated the communists is the communists were taking orders from Moscow. The communists, as the Nazis saw it, were traitors to Germany. And so there were battles, street battles between these groups. And so this communist sets fire to the Reichstag. Well, what happened is that the Nazis and Hitler used that as a pretext, not only to outlaw a whole bunch of rival political parties, really all of them in the end, but to pass the so-called Enabling Act. And the Enabling Act turned over legislative authority, basically from the parliament to Hitler, making him, in a sense, the supreme ruler of Nazi Germany. Now, the analogy isn't perfect. It's not as if all legislative authority has gone over to Biden, but it is the case that the government, the democratically controlled government, and democratic here, I mean Democrat-controlled government, the House, the Senate, and the White House, have arrogated to themselves extraordinary powers. I mean, look at this January 6th Commission. It's acting like a judicial proceeding. And so what they've done is they've taken advantage of January 6th to do a bunch of things. One, to shut down any dissent over the election. Number two, to justify a regime of censorship and ostracism for anyone who questions whether this is the most secure election in history. And number three, to then classify critics of the Democratic Party and of the left as sort of enemies of the state. Domestic terrorists, people who should be hunted and hounded by the FBI and the police organs of the government. So all of this is straight, you could call it Reichstag fire stuff, because this is something that that the Germans, and again, when we think of the Nazis today, we think of the Holocaust. But let's remember, we're talking about the early Nazi days, 1933. The war didn't start till 1939. And of course, the final solution, so-called, was put in place in the last years of the war. So we're talking about the early, when we make an analogy, we're not making an analogy to Auschwitz or Dachau. We're making an analogy to the conduct of the democratic left in America today with that of the Nazis when they first came to power.